You, it can be discouraging seeing others already doing what you're aspiring to do and feeling like maybe I'm not going to make it, maybe I'm not good enough. But also believing that it's a process and you're going through the process, and it's important to go through the steps and not rush to get published or whatever.
Look, if it's any help, this is how I started it with design. I was very happy to find other artists and designers who are so much better than me. And I was looking at them and trying to replicate the style and try to understand what they were doing and how they were thinking about specific ideas. And somewhere in the back of my mind was like, maybe in 10 years, I'll do something at the level that they're doing. But I was so happy to find them and in general not be the smartest one in the room, because you still have something to discover and something to aspire to. And that's what keeps you going. That's actually the thrill of it all. It's not necessarily maybe publishing. It's actually keeping that element of curiosity and discovery and perspectives from different people. And as long as you keep that, you can write however many books you might want to, or just write one. You're still going to find enjoyment in what you do.
Hi, we're Sabina and Silviana, welcoming you to our final episode this season with a very special, funny, and warm guest. Season 6 was all about unpacking what makes us better writers, and I think we've come to a conclusion. It's embedded in every conversation we've had, including this one. A special thanks to Cărturești for supporting our efforts to make writing and reading more enjoyable, and our love for our community at Zest, some of whom we meet monthly during our draft writing workshop. Thank you for showing up despite fears, insecurities, and other life priorities. We added new days to the calendar, so check them out on patreon.com/zestpodcast, and we'll see you next year. And now, over to our guest, best-selling international author Markus Zusak. Markus Zusak is an Australian writer and author of several books, including the international bestseller The Book Thief, which spent more than a decade on the New York Times bestseller list, has been translated into more than 40 languages, and has also made it to the big screen. Markus started writing at 16 and faced rejections and self-doubt before becoming an award-winning author. How was that process for him? He told us himself during a conversation we had at Filit Iași. If you've been listening to this season, you know that our soundtrack is the charming, buzzing atmosphere of one of the best literary events in Romania, and probably Europe. Enjoy! I'm going to start with something which you said, I think, in different interviews, which is when you wrote The Book Thief and maybe other books as well, you thought, nobody's going to read this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thought that everyone has in the beginning. Everyone who aspires to write or likes to write, you think nobody's going to read this. How do you go from that to so many people reading you? I mean, I know the story, how you got to it, but what do you think was it in your case that got you from nobody's going to read this to, wow, so many people are reading this?
Yeah, I think it was the miracle of just a few decisions I made writing that book. And there were certain things that I couldn't imagine. And it's true when I tell people that I thought that book would be my least successful book. And because I thought of someone telling their friend, oh, you should read this book. And they say, what's it about? And you say, well, it's set in Nazi Germany. It's narrated by death. Nearly everybody dies. Oh, and it's 580 pages long. You'll love it. And so that freed me up to write it in exactly the way I really wanted it to be. And death was the way into the book. And then people found these characters in there maybe that just sort of came to life. And that's really all I was trying to do. Sometimes if you overcomplicate thinking about how something's going to be successful is the easiest way to make it not successful. And it's like as soon as you start feeling like you're owed something, you never get it. So it's best to sort of live your life through the tunnel of doing what you need to do. And that's what I told myself writing The Book Thief all the time. It was like, do what you have to do. And don't worry, because it was taking me a long time to write. And I saw all these new authors coming up around me, getting books published. And then I just went, no, stay focused on what you have to do. And then if no one reads the book, that's okay as well. I was lucky to have a book that people then picked up and then gave to their friends. And then that's happened across the world, and I still am quite surprised.
You published 4 books before that. Did you have the same mindset as you did with The Book Thief? Like, I'm just gonna enjoy this and love the characters? Or was it more conscious of, I'm going to publish this and maybe people are gonna like it?
Yeah, I think what happened, it was almost like, I've never actually explained it like this before, but maybe the first 4 books were a little bit like when you go on a roller coaster. And the first 4 books were just that as you go up. And then The Book Thief was the book that just, when I was writing it, it was like the rest of that ride. And it would go down and then still be, it'd go up and then just get to the top and then come flying down again. And it was, I think, the book where I really let go. I think I knew I could write a book because the book before that, The Messenger, was a bigger book than my previous ones. Bigger it was about 350 pages. And I knew that I had the stamina to write a bigger book. And so now it was just, all right, go in and do it. But as I've said before, The Book Thief was only supposed to be a small book. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and sort of kept growing underneath me and started to come to life because of that. So I think it's maybe the rule is to sort of follow your surprises a little bit. And when you start writing, as soon as you feel something is becoming unusual, follow that. Follow that because it's taking you where you need to go. And the best part of being a writer is when you surprise yourself. And The Book Thief surprised me the most as I was writing it out of all of my books, I think.
Was it a surprise in style or in topic and story?
I think style more than anything. And just the idea that creating a world that felt very real to me, even though I'd never sort of been in it. It felt very fresh all the time. It was like waking up and opening your door and the air is very crisp and a little bit cold and a little bit like startled. And so there was always a sense of wonder when I was writing that book, I think. I never felt, there were times in the middle where I felt really tired. But there were always new awakenings when I was writing it. So I always felt very young when I was writing that book. And I followed that feeling as much as I could.
How did you develop your style? How did you learn writing, let's say, the writing technique?
After I'd written 3 or 4 books and tried to write some poems, and I started to find my own style. And then I started realizing that I shouldn't try to be an intellectual writer, really. That me, it's more about feelings and bringing words together in a different way. But simple words, not necessarily big words. And there was an idea that you could be very creative out of simple words. And so 2 simple words together that aren't often together create something equally special to a big intellectual word, I think. Actually, probably better. It's why they often, when you hear children speak or you hear children tell stories or you hear children put words together in a certain way and you think, oh my God, that's so unusual, so creative. And we lose that as we get older. And so I think when I'm writing, I'm trying to recapture that, to see the world in a totally newly invented way again. But yet it's something that we recognize. And that's what I've often heard described what a novel is or a great story is. It's the world we know, but as if we're seeing it for the first time. And that's what I'm trying to do with not every sentence, but every now and again a sentence that jumps out of the page and really makes the reader just stop for a moment and reconsider how they see the world.
It's interesting that you say that. I have a 3-year-old and he just comes up with the craziest phrases or ideas. It's very funny, it's very surprising, and it's very difficult to recapture that, I think, because we trained our minds then to think as everybody else, as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you're writing those things down.
I should be.
Yeah, and it's always the way, and me too, and I'm a writer, and there was a time where I was writing them down all the time, and then, I remember once when my daughter was 3, we were in America, we were in Seattle, and just we were on the street, we walked around the corner, and there was a lady walking 2 dogs, and one of the dogs was a big poodle, and my daughter, she came around the door and she said, "Oh, look at those 2 dogs." And then she said, "Oh, hang on, one of them's a sheep." and it was just one of those moments where it was just, oh, it's so, you have this image of a woman walking one dog and one sheep down the street. And that's when your children make you feel young again, even though you're usually tired because of all the things you do for them. Do you have more than just one?
Just
child?
one,
Yeah.
just 3-year-old. Yeah.
3 years old. That's a hard time, but a good time.
Because you're tired, you don't always write down what they say.
Very.
But I think, as many writers say that they take their inspiration just from walking down the street, hearing conversations. I think that's another source of inspiration.
Yeah.
Young
Yeah.
children.
I actually have so many stories of those kinds of things. A couple, like one, my son he's 13 now. My daughter is 17. And I remember there's a type of bird in Australia, and it's got not a very nice name, but it's called a shag. And it stands very still. And it's often sitting on a rock. And so often someone will say, if someone's not moving, people will say, oh, look at you, you're just standing there like a shag on a rock, all right? And once my son, he was coming through the doorway and he said, oh, I'm freezing, I'm so cold. He said, oh, I'm like a freezer on a rock. And those things always make us laugh. But the funniest one, I have to test this one out on you because you never know in an audience or something how this will be received. Once we were on holiday and my son, he was about 4 years old, maybe 5 years old. And it was very hot and we were going to our car and we were putting things in the car and there was a whole lot but there was all this sand in the car and I took my T-shirt off and I brushed the sand out of the car, all right? And my son came around the corner and often in Australia we'll say, you know, what are you doing here just standing around? Or what are you doing here just... And so I was there with no T-shirt on because I'd taken it off and he came around the corner and he saw me and he said, hey, Pop, like my kids call me Pop for some reason. He said, hey, Pop, what are you doing here in just your nipples? And so like only a child would say that, you know, and it was so funny. And I actually put it in the book I was writing at the time. So it's quite funny. And but that's the wonder that I want to have when I'm writing a book or reading a book. And I think that's what brings it to life.
Together with the podcast, we also do a monthly writing. The community gathers and we write together online. It's called Draft because we think that the most difficult part is just to write that first or the first drafts that maybe don't really make it to the end, but it's so difficult to put that or make the first steps. Is it like that for you? Is it difficult to write the first drafts?
Yeah, and I'm always like when I was in high school and university, I was the classic student who writes the whole assignment the night before it's due. And so even when I'm writing a draft, I'm writing it as if it is I'm trying to write the finished product. But I also realize you can't get stuck writing the first paragraph or the first page. But you're absolutely right. The hardest thing to do is to start. So I just tell myself, all you have to do is just show up at the desk and watch something on YouTube or something if you have to, or listen to a song or listen and then just go, but now just start. And you don't actually have to do anything good. Don't worry about, try not to make it good. Just try to do something. And what I find then is that it usually gets easier. After the first 10 minutes, it gets easier. And then you're not going to write something complete, but you'll write something that you can at least use the day after that and the day after. And then what you have, and I really like describing it like this, is it's almost like you have a carcass or a dead body to sort of, take all the pieces from, and you say, all right, I'll take that. That's good. And then the rest you just have to throw away. But I find often the less serious we are about it is I like to approach it as if it's work and that's hard work and that it's training and commitment and dedication and toughness, like mental toughness. It's all of those things. But then you also have to be prepared you do all that hard work so that then you can play with it and not be too serious all the time. And often it's when you let go of that. You have to do all that, But the magic is when you let go and just exist writing. And that's why I tell people all the time as well. I just say that, like, people want very meaningful writing advice. And I just say, don't beat yourself up when you don't feel like doing it. Don't be too hard on yourself, because if you really are a writer, you'll come back. That's what I've been doing for the last, since I was 16 years old, writing something, feeling terrible about it, realizing it's no good, and then starting again, and coming back. And I think that's actually half the job, is convincing yourself to turn up again at your desk, and also realizing that a lot of the time you don't feel like you're very good at it, but you're probably better at it than most other things that you do. So you've got to keep going. And there is nothing like finishing a book. There's no better feeling. Especially, often you'll stay up all night to finish, and the rest of the world is just waking up when you're finishing. It's a great feeling that you know that everyone else is still asleep, and you have this moment that you've created for yourself. I think that's actually one of the best feelings. But it only happens once in a book. And sometimes after a lot of years, but it's worth it.
Well, how do you know that's the night when you finish the book? Because you do a lot of rewriting and revisiting. How do you know that's the moment it's done?
Yeah, there might still be work after that, of course, and where you're doing more edits and all of that. I think there's always a moment or a night or a long day where you say, this is it, where I feel like there is something complete there that I still have to work on, but it's a complete thing. And I think how I know when that night is, or when that day is that you try to do it on other nights and it doesn't work. And then I remember one specifically where I wanted to stay up all night going, this is it, I'm going to really, and then I lay down on the floor and I just went to sleep. So I knew that wasn't the night. And it wasn't until years later that I did actually finish. So I think a lot of writing too is, I guess, what we would call kidding yourself, like fooling yourself that you're nearly there, but you're not. So it's such an amazing sort of game you play with yourself, that you're always trying to win, but you have to fight for the wins, but you also have to play to get there as well. And I think we have to understand that it's a very multifaceted experience over a period of time, and you have to be willing to take the hard times, and you also have to give yourself a break, and you have to give yourself moments where you're just loving it, because it shouldn't be hard labor all the time. And I think I've seen the difference between books, where The Book Thief is the sort of book, it was a tremendous effort to write, but it was a joyful effort. But it was a tremendous effort to write, but it reads as if it was effortless. Whereas a book like Bridge of Clay, the book that came after it, was a tremendous, huge effort to write. But I think you can feel the effort in the writing, like when you read it. And that's not a terrible thing, but it's the difference between a book that just goes into the stratosphere a little bit, like The Book Thief did, whereas Bridge of Clay is for my, I think, tougher readers, the readers who are, I think, like true believers in a way. And so when someone comes up to me and says, oh, I love Bridge of Clay more than The Book Thief, that's when I say, yeah, that's not a book for weaklings. That's a book for, you're a real reader. And it's not that I think it's big, high-end literature. It's not even. It's what I always do, but that's tougher. It's a bit tougher to read, and that's just what that book needed. So every book is like a different language, I suppose.
You once described writer's block in a way that I really liked. It's not a writer's block, it's a writer's lack of faith. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, I can always write something. It's just, I just can't always write something good. And so you write something and you go, oh my God. And so that's the thing that makes it hardest for me to write, is not that I don't know what the story is, or that I'm blocked, or I've got no ideas. I feel like I've always got ideas. It's just a matter of if there has to be a good idea that is then written in the way that it should be written, and that's a hard combination to navigate. So I'm most doubtful of myself a lot. I should doubt myself less. I would write much faster if I did, but I think it also has made me the writer that I am, is that I'm not easily satisfied. And I have some writer friends or people that I know and they'll come up to me and, oh, how's your new book? And I say, oh, it's better. It's the best book I've written yet. And everyone loves it. And sometimes I think, God, I wish I could feel like you do. But actually, the writers that I love reading the most are usually writers who doubt themselves a lot. Because I think a lot of thought goes into the choice of every word and every decision that makes them. I try not to make writing sound too much like we're artists or something. I feel like a tradesman that's in pursuit of an art. But they're the writers that I think are the most artful, the ones who doubt themselves a lot because they're not easily satisfied. And I think that's why I'm doubtful of myself, because I'm always doubtful if I can do a good job. And that's part of that whole strange process.
For every season of the podcast, we have different themes. And this season's theme, it focuses on how reading and why reading helps us write better. I heard you said in an interview that you read I read it, that you read the same books over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
How does that help you, and how does that help you as a writer?
Yeah, I think it helps me get to know, not in a scientific way, but I sort of get a real feel for how a book that I've admired, how I feel like I'm there and I'm inside it. And what it is doing is it's telling me you have to find your own way to do this. And you become an expert in something by repeatedly doing it. Not many of us can do something once and be really great at it. So I find the repetition of reading books over and over again, it's how I unlock the secrets of a writer. And I think I get a feel for that writer's commitment to what they've written. And so somewhere in my subconscious, it's telling me, all right, this is what you have to live up to. This is what you have to try to achieve. This is the level you're trying to get to. And so the advice I often give, because I often hear writers say, to be a writer, you have to read everything. You have to read every genre, and I sort of think that's not how I became a writer. I read not widely, but narrowly, and knowing what I love. And so I think that kind of focus is what led me to become the sort of writer that I am. Very specific about what I want. To have a very specific focus, and it's one thing to know what you want, but then difficult to achieve it. But I like the idea that writing isn't always easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Tell me a couple of authors or books that modeled your writing, or that you read over and over again trying to find the secret.
Early on in my teenage years, there was an American writer, S.E. Hinton. She's famous for writing the book The Outsiders when she was 16 years old. And there's another book of hers that's not as well known called Rumblefish, which I loved that book. And I even still read it now. And it's very short, it's 90 pages or 100 pages. And that was one very early on. Another book was by Lars Sabai Christensen, a Norwegian writer, a book called The Half-Brother. And it's a big book, but I just love the commitment of that book. And I read that book many times, and some Australian novels as well. And I always feel like we have a lot of gaps in our reading. But I'm trying to think, the last book that I reread was probably a book called Old School, and it's by Tobias Wolff, and it's about a boy in a boarding school. And it's such a great book because it changes focus at the 90% mark of the book. When there's only a little bit to go, the book suddenly becomes about somebody else. And he gets away with it. And I just think it's quite amazing. So it's about this boy who plagiarizes a story and enters it into the school writing competition, and it wins. And then what happens is, it instead of it being about him at the end, it's about the principal of the school or the chancellor of the school. It's so amazing. And the reason I love that book is that it's the voice. Sometimes you pick up a book and you pick it up and the voice just says to you immediately, you're in very safe hands. Everything I say to you is true. And that's how that book feels to me. So there are a few examples. Of course, I'll walk away now and remember other ones. But But there are a few examples of books I've reread.
What creates that voice in the book, do you think?
I don't know. That is the greatest mystery. And I think that was why The Book Thief is the book that it is, because the voice of death just had something unique about it. And I felt like I could sort of take the book anywhere or do anything because of that voice. Whereas the voice in Bridge of Clay, I mean, it was hard to write a book after being the voice of death. But it took a very long time to get the voice right. And I had, honestly, at least 12 different narrators of that book to finally finish on the right one. And even then, it was the fourth or fifth time I used that character as the voice. So getting the voice is, I think, sometimes the easiest thing. If it comes naturally, go. If it doesn't come naturally, then it's very hard. But yeah, finding the voice, if you feel like you've got it, don't ask questions. Just go with it.
And talking about voice, you also like reading out loud, correct? That helps you?
Yeah, especially when I'm editing a book or reading through, I always just a little bit I read to myself out loud. And that's why when I'm working at home, actually, it's quite good because at least my wife knows I'm working and not wasting time or sleeping. But she says, can you close your door? It's bothering me. But it comforts me to read aloud. But sometimes I think I shouldn't do it because when I'm reading somebody else's book or when someone's reading my book, they're not reading it aloud. And I think it's different when you read aloud to when you read inside your head. But it's just a habit that I do now. And it helps me really concentrate on what I'm reading.
Yes, but when you're writing it and you've been rewriting so many times, you cannot see it anymore. So probably reading out loud helps you get change the angle a bit. Here the phrase is fresh.
You're right. And it helps you. I think it also tells you that you've got a job to do. It's like a physical reminder that you've got to focus on this. And so, I've been probably doing that for the last 20 years.
So one last question for you. If let's say we had a billboard here in Center Yash and you could write something there, whatever message you want, what would you write?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to think about it for a moment because it would probably be, if I had to get it, okay, since it's a billboard, I would probably say, it's not the most beautiful sentence, but it would just be problems create imagination, I would say. Because that's often what I say to people is people think to be a writer you have to have a great imagination. But I don't have a great imagination. I have a lot of problems. I sit down, I start a book, and I have a problem. And I've got to get around that problem. And that's where my imagination is. That's where the voice of death is in The Book Thief, is getting around the problem of death sounding too dark and sadistic to make him vulnerable and actually caring of humans and being haunted by humans. That's where imagination is. So that would be what I'd put on a billboard. But again, I'm a slow thinker, not a fast thinker. If I see you later on, I'll give you a better one.
But I think that's a great message and a great way of reframing imaginations and problems as well.
Here, I'm going to give you another alternative.
Okay.
We have to have options. And I think this is a good one because it actually plays on words a little bit more. And I would just put up, failure is not failure. That's a good billboard. I think because that really makes us think about just what effort is. And just because we write something that doesn't work the first time, what you were saying about drafts is that, you got to put it down and then you start to fix it. And I think failure is not failure is probably better because it's not. It's one more attempt that gets you where you need to go. And right down to, I remember my kids learning to play the piano and I would sit with them and we'd have to have one fight before they really started trying, or they'd get it wrong and then they'd get all mad and I would say, no, see, that's just the one more step you needed to make till you make it perfect. It's not going to happen without that. So I do really believe that.
We've taken so much inspiration from our conversations at Feel It, and we hope you did too. We are Sabina Varga, host and producer, and Silviana Toader, our director and producer of Zest podcast. We're taking a break between seasons, but we'll be back, and we continue to meet and write with our community. If you'd like to join, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/zestpodcast. We have fun, I promise. And though we don't usually do this, we'll end with another snippet of conversation we had during a coffee break. If you go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, you're going to see the evolution of his work. And it goes from sketches, childish sketches, to more complicated, to experimenting. And you see the evolution towards the paintings that we all know today. But he started from scratch. And there you can see that. I went to that museum after I want to recommend this book. Irving Stone wrote a biographical novel about Van Gogh. It's called Lust for Life, so it's translated in Romanian Bucuria Vieții, talking about books that help us be better artists or creatives or writers. It's a great book that shows the process. He was quite a struggling artist, but he kept going and believing in enjoying the process and believing and starting from scratch and learning. And he got to where we all know he got. And I think it's so important for everybody to see that process, especially maybe for young people, to understand it takes time, it takes failure. People are not going to believe in you. You're going to doubt yourself. You need support from others. That's why we're trying to get people to write those first drafts, because we know it's hard. You feel like you suck.
Yeah.
And
sometimes you do.
And you suck. It's not just your opinion. You do suck. And I think this came up in some of my conversations that we had here at Feel It. When you're more experienced, you know that those first drafts are going to suck, and you just get over it. That's the thing about
it. Gets easier and easier.
Yeah, it's not like you get better at that. You don't get better. You get better at getting over it.
Yes.
And continuing.
Yes. And some ideas really have to die. I mean, I've had some, I know.
But it's fine. You have to start somewhere. Like the first title I had for this podcast was really shitty.
I remember that conversation.
But it was a first title. Yeah, and we started from there. And why is this shitty? Okay, that's why. Let's find something better. And here we are, 5 years later, still talking about how to get better. Because this is a process. It never stops. And we love it.